Hi, my name is Jeanette, if you didn't already know, and I'm here to tell you all a story. One that I didn't experience, but more so my parents. Many of you may not know, but I am a first-generation student. No, not like in Pokemon. The first generation I'm talking about means that I'll be the first to go to college, in my family. What they didn't tell you is that first generation will be the first for everything. I was the first to go to school in the US, first to get into SMART, the organization that got me into AVS, the first to speak fluent English, etc. But there's also a reason I was able to do all of this. A story behind all of this. A story that reminds me of how grateful and amazing I am for the life I'm living. All thanks to my parents. My parents grew up in China. My dad was a sister, and my mom with 3 other siblings. My mom would always tell me childhood stories that remind me of how grateful I am every day. One of the many stories was the egg story. My grandpa, who I believe to be a great person from all the stories my mom has told me, worked in a factory and always had company-provided lunches. Instead of eating it for himself, he would save it and bring it back home to my mother and her siblings. He would sometimes have a hard-boiled egg, and it would be split between 4 children, saving none for himself. He was selfless, always putting his children before him. I've never met him before. He passed away before I was born due to a lung disease. As my parents grew up, they both got an average education relative to the time they were born in. The amount of education they got is nothing compared to the type of education I got here in the US, even though they both went to elementary, middle, and high school. After they received their high school diplomas, they were forced to work to support their families. My dad soon grew up to be a taxi driver. He drove people around the city of Guangzhou, the city that I visited this summer. He would start work early in the morning and get home late at night. My mom grew up to be a ticket seller for buses, following the footsteps of her brother, my uncle, as well as her dad, my grandpa. She would go on to buses and sell tickets to the people on the bus, and that was what she did for a living for several years. They eventually met while on a vacation trip with some of their friends and got married on December 15, 2000. When I was younger, my dad would put the recording of their wedding on the TV, and I would watch it over and over again. My mom in her long flowing white dress, and my dad in his button-up suit. A picture of them on their wedding day is still in my parents' room. January 16, 2002, the day that my parents got a one-way ticket to the US. I haven't heard many stories about this day. The small snippets of information were a mixture of happy and sad memories from my aunts, cousins, and grandma. Happy for my parents to be going to the US, happy for the new life they were going to have in the US, the easier life. Sad that they were leaving, sad because they didn't know when they would come back. Sad that they were afraid that they were going to be alone in the new world. Everyone was crying, my aunts, my grandma, my cousins, my dad, and my mom. The amount of emotion it takes for my mother to cry is a lot. In my life, I've never seen my mother cry before, not once. She has always had the strong facade as my mother. Not once has she cried in front of me, even in her hardest times. Once she cut open her finger with a knife. While my dad and I were running around the house like maniacs, trying to find things to stop the blood flow, she remained so calm. I asked myself if she really did cut her finger open. She didn't shed a single tear, but didn't show an ounce of pain. Yes, she cried when she was moving away from her family. She's strong physically, but has a soft spot for her family. She's someone I aspire to be throughout my life. Once they got to the US, my mother worked a factory job, and my dad did many labor jobs. They both struggled to make money and lived in a really small apartment for the longest time. They ate small meals every day with the little amount of money they had after paying rent, the water bill, and the electricity bill. On top of all of this, they didn't know anyone. We had a few relatives, they lived close by, but my parents weren't close to them and didn't want to ask people for money. They didn't know any English, and my mom was learning a small amount of English by the day so that she could become a legal US citizen. They didn't have enough money to afford a car, so everywhere they went had to be by foot or by public transportation. The car they bought more than a decade ago is still able to be driven now. September 16, 2004. A child was born at 6:24 a.m. If you haven't caught on by now, it was me. I grew up like a normalish child, fell off several things several times, got many bruises, got some scars that you can still see on my legs to this day. I guess you could say I was a little troublemaker. I never really acted like a girl growing up. I hung out around boys, didn't play with Barbies or makeup, and never really wore pink. If you could see my toy collection back then, it would consist of many, many toy trucks and a few Lego sets. I still remember I had this Spider-Man toy that you could flip it, and it would turn to a Spider-Man into a normal man. The toy is probably laying around somewhere in my house, to be honest. All these past experiences that my parents faced painted a different reality that uncovered as these stories unfolded one by one. All these problems that my parents faced, and I was completely oblivious to it. The struggles that I faced moving to an unknown place just for me to have a less stressful life. My parents moved us out of the small apartment shortly after I was born. They were struggling to pay the bills and never had any free time to spend with me. My aunt was the homeowner of the next house we stayed in, which we still live to in this day. My mother would have to take me outside to the park every day because my aunt always thought I was way too loud. So every single day, my mom had to bring me outside and carry me everywhere she went. She had to quit her job and become a full-time mother while my dad was the only one that was supporting the family. On top of all this, my great-grandmother, who passed away in 2011, moved into our small house, and my mother had to take care of her as well. My mother would have to carry her in the bathroom, do her laundry, and cook her dinner, like she was a small child. I would spend most of my days upstairs with my aunt and uncle. When I was old enough to go to school, I didn't go upstairs to see my aunt and uncle anymore. Despite not seeing him as often anymore, he had still done a lot of things for me, whether it was educational or not. He would play games with me or just entertain me in general. There were also times where he would test me on my math skills, until I had memorized them and could recite the answers back to him without hesitation. I had my uncle to thank for my exceptional mental math skills at such an early age, along with the small lessons of how to be humble. My uncle was down to earth and kept to himself a lot, so when he passed away in 2013, it came to me as a shock, as I was only 8 or 9 at the time. My parents hadn't told me about his sickness leading up to his death, probably not wanting me to be exposed to the idea of dying at such a young age. But all in all, I was grateful for all he had done for me and the foundation of knowledge he had helped me build, which shapes who I am today. I hope that this speech ignited a small spark of gratitude into you, because writing the speech over the course of 2 weeks definitely made me rethink all the times I had worthless arguments with my parents. They had done so much for me, and often all I given back to them was disrespect and ingratitude. Please, tell your parents you love them no matter how wrong they've done. You've probably heard this a million times before, and you'll hear it again now. They only want the best for you, and this finally was engraved into my mind after writing the speech. Not once have my parents wished that I failed something. They've let me pursue my hobbies, like piano, violin, writing, and math. I've looked up to my parents so much. They've sacrificed so much for me, and I've promised myself that I will make it up to them, bit by bit as I grow older. So I encourage you to find someone you look up to and aspire to be everything positive about that person. But most importantly, be someone others look up to. Thank you.